So by way of introduction, my name is Lena, and since I was in middle school, I have not always been great at math. I remember being in Mrs. Wong's class in the seventh grade and completely struggling with the content and struggled to continue and all the way into college. I took this statistics class, and at the end of the semester, I remember getting a C, and it was the one and only C that I have gotten in college, and I just cried. And I know C's get degrees and a C is still passing, but it was really hard for me to not understand something and get something. And I could not understand math or data for the life of me, no matter how hard I studied. It just did not click. And fast forward to today, I am a senior global researcher and people analyst at Google. And I started Google back in 2017 and the people analytics team. And our people analytics team is a data analytics team within our people ops or our HR organization at Google, where our goal really is to try to ensure that all decisions about people, our employees, future employees, are data driven. And I have been able to work on a ton of cool different things over the years, from learning about the things that makes a manager effective. How do you build a productive team? What drives attrition? And most primarily, I work on our employee sentiment survey, which is what we call Google Geist. And it is this survey that surveys our global population of employees to all 200,000 employees across the world and almost every country on core elements of their work experience. And those results, they get interpreted directly back to our CEO and his leadership team. And on a monthly basis, I go in to meet with our CEO and our C-suite executives at Google to present the findings and the state of our employees, as well as teach and train our VPs across the company on how to tell effective stories with data. And so today, I am here to share a few tips and tricks with you that I've learned over the years so that you too can drive change and impact on your career and on your businesses. And this is applicable even to your personal lives as well. Like I shared, there is a lot in here, and we currently have a short amount of time. And I want you to have the most effective learnings possible so that you can begin to apply these. And so I have a full 2.5 hour long workshop on this. And ideally, I could spend a full day talking about how to tell effective stories. But I've consolidated as much as I can for our time together to hopefully leave you wanting more. So we'll go through and talk about the problem, the structure, the personalities, the idea, and then we'll do a small touch on data visualization at the very end to help you bring that story home and not just tell an effective story, but show, display, and visualize effective stories. When I think about the problem starting off, in a world where data just completely surrounds us, from our personal data being used on almost all technology platforms that we utilize to trying to make sense of the sheer size and sentiment of the world and to understanding how people think. And in the world of AI, data is one of our most valuable assets and one of the most valuable assets that companies have and own today. And right now, we are seeing kind of this huge emphasis on hiring across companies, any industry, hiring people with a data background, data scientists, AI researchers, those with deep technological expertise, people who have worked with large language models, data analysts. But now more than ever, since data is central to everything that we do, it's becoming more and more important to be able to harness the power of data to leverage your work, even though it is not just solely for people who have that full-on data background and data regimen. There's this huge emphasis on data scientists, but really storytelling with data and utilizing data is in everybody's wheelhouse. But the problem with that, and the problem with only kind of hiring those with those deep technical expertise, is that analytical people are really bad at communicating. And I don't want to give into the stereotypes of technical people here, but more often than not, analytical people are too smart for their own good, and they fail to communicate their deep expertise and communicate their research and communicate their findings to a non-researcher, non-analytical audience. And so that begs the question, how do you communicate your data and make your point? To do that, you use the basics of storytelling. And I have always said this in my line of work, and understanding that if being right was enough, we would not need stories. We would not need to influence and persuade people if facts and figures and numbers were the thing that just sent everyone home, because this world is not as black and white as we cut it out to be. And when we think of storytelling in the most basic of forms, we have to go way back to fifth grade, elementary school, middle school days, when we learned about that hero's journey. And that gave us the basic framework for storytelling. Every great story, movie, TV series follows this format. And what we have to do with our narratives is we do this exact same thing. We take them on a journey, because more than just sharing within the data, we have to see and we have to craft a narrative that accompanies that data. And the data and information you have is useless if the person you're speaking to can't understand it. And so you have to tie it all in together
Why,
with that.
hello.
Hello there.
What are you doing?
Okay,
Oh,
hello.
well, of course.
Okay, I think someone is
There we
off of
go.
mute.
I got him muted. We
There
should
we
be
go.
all
Okay,
good.
thank you so much. Okay, and so crafting that. And so we're going to get back into the elements of storytelling, but I think the most important piece here is understanding our audiences. We have to craft our story, but before we have to craft our stories, we have to understand who we are speaking to. And if we don't understand who we're speaking to, we automatically fail to begin to be an effective storyteller. And so I want to just level set and take us back to a iconic moment in US history that revolves around storytelling and the power of captivating your audience to rally those around you, but more importantly, speaking directly to what our audience needs and is yearning for. So I'm going back to the 80s, where Ronald Reagan, he was the president in the 80s. And he really believed in a strategic space program that was sort of a missile defense system for the US in space. And he really needed to get the American public behind him to get funding for this project. And he came up with a smart way to get people involved. And it was a contest that was held to select the first civilian to go to space. And who was selected was a teacher, Christine. She won the contest, beating out more than 11,000 other applicants at the time. And he struck a deal with CNN to broadcast the launch live to thousands of schools across the country. And this helped him get the momentum he needed to formally create International Space Station. And he even reached out to other nations to help, placing the US as a leader in this cooperative movement. And so this was a really big deal in American history, the first of its kind. But sadly, 73 seconds after launch, 73 seconds after launch, with hundreds of people on the ground, including the families of the astronauts, they stared in disbelief as the shuttle exploded in midair. Millions more watched this tragedy unfold on live television. And it was this moment that everyone felt, that everyone was watching, everyone was feeling. And there was the high excitement over the new program that was being launched, over the global movement that was taking place. And this happens. And I want to share a moment where Ronald Reagan was an effective storyteller. He was scheduled to speak to the nation for his State of the Union address about what the success of this historic event meant. But he had to quickly change course and rewrite the State of the Union and address a mixed audience. And so I want us to watch it and see how he does it. How did he maneuver this really complex time and leading and telling the story and speaking directly to the audience in a moment that was so hard for the American people and the world to watch and experience? So let's tune into this video.
No audio on this one. No audio on this one, Lena.
Oh, okay. We're going to pause this and we are going to try this one more time. Apologies for that. Andy, please give me something if you hear it.
Sure.
I'd planned to speak to you tonight to
Perfect.
report on
That's
the State of the Union. But the events of earlier today have led me to change those plans. Today is a day for mourning and remembering. Nancy and I are pained to the core by the tragedy of the Shuttle Challenger. We know we share this pain with all of the people of our country. This is truly a national loss. 19 years ago, almost to the day, we lost 3 astronauts in a terrible accident on the ground. But we've never lost an astronaut in flight. We've never had a tragedy like this. And perhaps we've forgotten the courage it took for the crew of the shuttle. But they, the Challenger 7, were aware of the dangers, but overcame them and did their jobs brilliantly. We mourn 7 heroes: Michael Smith, Dick Scobie, Judith Resnick, Ronald McNair, Ellison Onizuka, Gregory Jarvis, and Krista Mickel. We mourn their loss as a nation together. To the families of the 7, we cannot bear, as you do, the full impact of this tragedy. But we feel the loss, and we're thinking about you so very much. Your loved ones were daring and brave, and they had that special grace, that special spirit that says, give me a challenge, and I'll meet it with joy. They had a hunger to explore the universe and discover its truths. They wished to serve, and they did. They served all of us. We've grown used to wonders in this century. It's hard to dazzle us. But for 25 years, the United States space program has been doing just that. We've grown used to the idea of space, and perhaps we forget that we've only just begun. We're still pioneers. They, the members of the Challenger crew, were pioneers. And I want to say something to the school children of America who were watching the live coverage of the shuttle's takeoff. I know it's hard to understand, but painful things like this happen. It's all part of the process of exploration and discovery. It's all part of taking a chance and expanding man's horizons. The future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted. It belongs to the brave. The Challenger crew was pulling us into the future, and we'll continue to follow them. I've always had great faith in and respect for our space program, and what happened today does nothing to diminish it. We don't hide our space program. We don't keep secrets and cover things up. We do it all up front and in public. That's the way freedom is, and we wouldn't change it for a minute. We'll continue our quest in space. There will be more shuttle flights and more shuttle crews, and yes, more volunteers, more civilians, more teachers in space. Nothing ends here. Our hopes and our journeys continue. I want to add that I wish I could talk to every man and woman who works for NASA or who worked on this mission and tell them your dedication and professionalism have moved and impressed us for decades, and we know of your anguish. We share it.
Okay, so after hearing President Reagan's speech, I want to ask you all, and watching this, President Reagan, he was incredibly clear in who he was speaking to. And there were 5 distinct audiences throughout that clip that he spoke to. Can anyone name them? Feel free to come off mute or type it in the chat. But if anyone can identify some of those audiences that President Reagan was speaking to in his message. I'm seeing NASA staff, I'm seeing students, I'm seeing children, employees, families, public servants, the American people, citizens. Precisely. Everyone is getting it. He was speaking to the American people, noting that this was a national loss. He was speaking to the families of the astronauts, saying that they felt the loss, that they were brave, they met challenges, they discovered truths, and talked about the courage of the crew. He spoke to school children, and he speaks with a little bit of sugar here. He could have used the words and said it blew up in space, but he uses words they know. He spoke directly to them. Wonders, frontier, pioneers, exploration, discoveries, taking a chance. The future belongs to the brave. He was speaking using language that school children were excited about, that inspired them, that got them going. He talked about a little bit the Soviet Union weakens into a strength that we don't keep secret, we don't do it in public, and that's how freedom is. And finally, he talked to the NASA engineers and the NASA team, sharing that their dedication that has moved us for decades, and he doesn't doubt their professionalism. And here, what we're seeing and realizing through Reagan's speech is that we don't want our audience to just connect with our content because our message is good. We want to be able to create connection between ourselves as the speakers and our audience. And we connect by shared experiences, values, and goals. And when you have something in common with something else, with someone else, you listen more, you comprehend more. And this, as storytellers, is what we are after. And Reagan was a former Hollywood actor, and he did a fine job, but he didn't write the speech. A woman by the name of Peggy Newman wrote it, and she deserves a lot of credit here. Because in writing this speech, you can tell that they valued 2 questions here. And this is something that I encourage you all to value as you are thinking about stories, not even just storytelling with data, but communicating with your audiences and telling that story. Ask and understand these 2 questions. What do people need to hear from us? And most importantly, what do they need to feel from us? What does your audience need to hear? And what do they need to feel from your presentation or your touch point with them? Because President Reagan, he could have gone in and shared the facts about what went wrong and what happened and giving this really overly complex reason and rationale as to why this mission did not work. But what happened was he shared, most importantly, what the American people needed to hear in this moment in time. And so this gets me to my first point. It is so critical for us to know our audience. And whether we are presenting to stakeholders, making a case, our partners or clients or our customers, we have to know our audience. There is a research manager who has worked at AT&T since the beginning of time. And he shared this quote that said, designing a presentation without an audience in mind is like writing a love letter and addressing it to whom it may concern. So we have to know our audience. And understanding that we ourselves are translators, whether we like it or not. Oftentimes, as business owners and experts in our own field and spheres of influence, we have what's called this curse of knowledge. where we are so deeply into the weeds of our world that we often unconsciously assume that others have that same level of knowledge and context, which can lead to this miscommunication and loss of opportunities. So we have to learn how to speak the language of our audience. And that requires empathy, understanding our audience perspectives, understanding what they need in that moment and what's most important to them, and being able to decipher and discern where in the process are we? Because not everything needs to be communicated in this first touch point. Not everything needs to be communicated to every single person involved. And so using analogies and metaphors to connect with the audience's existing knowledge and focus in on the why before diving into the how. And so in order to do that, we have to tailor our communication to different stakeholders, recognizing that they have different needs and adapting our message from there. And so I want to go into helping you to understand that there are 5 different types of people, as noted by this 2002 Harvard Business Review. First, we have the charismatic individual. We have the skeptic. We have the thinker. We have the follower. And then finally, we have the controller. And we're going to have to understand who we are speaking to and appeal directly to their needs and their wants. And for each of these profiles, we're going to have to understand and answer the following questions from them. And so I'm going to list out a few questions and topic areas that I want you to consider as you are thinking through your messaging. First of all, understanding their values, knowing what is important to your audience. How do they spend their time and their money? What are their priorities? What unites them or entices them? Then you're going to have to understand their level of knowledge. What do they already know or feel about your topic? From what sources do they get their knowledge? What biases do they have, good and bad? And why did they come to you specifically? And then I want you to think about their desire and motivation. Understanding what do they need or desire? What is lacking in their lives? Knowing what gets them out of bed. Do they have clear OKRs or goals for their team or their org or for themselves? And finally, understand their lifestyle. Walk in their shoes and describe what their life looks like. How do their values come forward in that? Who do they connect with? And what's likable and what's special about them? You can look up this Harvard Business Review to understand these different archetypes. I want to make sure we're getting into the nitty-gritty of the storytelling aspect, but I really want you all to be able to ask yourselves these types of questions when you are thinking about your audience and crafting your message to them. And oftentimes you're going to maybe have to segment your communication to speak to different audience members. You're going to have to segment your information to have different deliverables and different presentations depending on who you're speaking to. And this part of understanding your audience, it takes time. It takes a lot of listening. It takes a lot of understanding their values, their lifestyle, their needs, their desires, and the problems that they have. And that's going to be a really critical part to landing your messaging, because you can have the best product in the world, you can have the best service in the world, you can provide the most wonderful thing to your customers and to your team. But if you don't know how to speak their language in a way that they can understand it and action on it, we fail every time. And so I want you to just look at this here, because the most important thing is to use the goal, which is your why, and your audience, which is the who, as your North Star. It's never the topic or the prompt. And I think so often we want to just get our points across, but we fail to understand our audience to be able to land the message. And so we see here this, I'm thinking about the what. We are showing the revenue trends of product A and B. And we have different whys. We want to understand why we want to inform and report on these trends. And so we have to have a different approach. If we want to just inform and report, we may have to just keep it broad and comprehensive. But if we want to drive decisions to bundle product A and product B together, we have to focus on how their revenue is correlated. Or if we want to drive a decision to pull product B off the shelf, we have to focus in on how product A could offset revenue loss from product B. Or if we just want to build credibility with our audience, we have to dazzle your insights and expertise in this area to show that I am proficient in being able to showcase and talk to you about the revenue trends of product A and B. But thinking about now understanding your audience, you have your why and your who, but understanding your audience. If you are showcasing the revenue trends still of product A and product B, how you talk to the data scientist working on product A will be completely different from how you share it with the CEO or the finance head. So to a CEO, you might condense it to a one-pager on the most strategic decision. But if you're talking to a data scientist or your head of product, you're going to have to focus more deeply on whatever it is they care about. So the head of product will want to talk about how product strategy drives revenue. But if you're talking to someone in finance, you're going to have to focus in on the ROI and profitability of both of those products. And you see here how understanding who you are talking to, whether that be in a moving speech like President Reagan did, or in the context of your business, understanding who you are talking to determines how you are going to share what you need to share in the most effective way that is relevant to the audience. Oftentimes, like I said, we just want to share and we don't keep in mind our audience. And that's the most important thing, to make sure we are speaking their language, because we are translators. And this takes me to really the meat of this presentation, and it's diving into our topic and really understanding your idea that you are trying to present, and most importantly, your why. And so when you are speaking to the core of your idea and you're searching for it and you're looking for it, when crafting your narratives, I want you to be able to kind of go through those some questions to help you decipher and understand the core of your idea. That first one is, why should your audience care? Why is it helpful to them? Understanding what is the desired outcome if your idea is not accepted? What is your unique point of view? And what's at stake if we don't change now? And so we'll go through those in depth in a few moments. But I think in order to get to the core of your idea, we have to kind of get to that why. And we have to leverage those 5 whys exercise to dig deep and uncover your big idea. And we constantly have to ask ourselves why in terms of what we are explaining to people and what we want them to do. Because oftentimes, as business owners and leaders, we make decisions with our own point of view and lane in mind. But oftentimes, we don't always associate what we're doing with what's most top of mind for our audience. And we have to understand why the audience cares about this and why it is helpful to them. And so thinking about a little kid, when you tell them something and they always consistently ask why, you give another reasoning and they ask again, why? You give another reasoning and they ask again, why? And challenging yourself to come up and go through just the why, until you get to the most simplest basics of answers. Like I said, we have this curse of knowledge oftentimes, and we overcomplicate things way too frequently. And so we can just get to the core of dissecting our decisions to our teams, our suppliers, our partners, knowing that we have to convince them as well. And we have to dissect our ideas, break it down, and understand what we are asking of our audience, and then we can move forward with our idea. And so to do that, the first thing that you have to have is a point of view. and understanding you have a unique point of view on a particular topic and sharing that. And then you have to add in some stakes here. You have to share you share your point of view, but you have to share that if your audience does not adopt your point of view, what will happen? And from there, that forms a complete sentence. So it's really easy for them to understand. And so as an example, my unique point of view in this world that I want to get across to you all. And this is where most people just stop. They stop at their point of view. They share their point of view and they wonder why no one does anything with their information. And they share it, but it doesn't answer the so what question. And so my point of view here that I want to get across to you all is if you want to make a dent in this world, it starts with a well-crafted story. But when we add in the stakes for our audience, they're far more inclined to act because they know what's in it for them. And so what's in it for you all is that storytelling is the key to unlock your abilities and advance your career. And so what we have my point of view. Storytelling is key to unlock your abilities. And the stakes for you all is that it advances your career. And so now this is a complete sentence to be able to craft my narrative around. And so when you're thinking about presenting something, whether it be to your teams or within your company or within your organization or within your suppliers, your stakeholders, your partners, make sure you always use complete sentences. And that requires you to know your audience, to know and understand their stakes and what's in it for them as a result of this decision, but also forming your unique point of view to clearly articulate your point and your goal to be able to evoke change. And our goal is to transform our audience from what they think, feel, or do today and what they will do tomorrow after they hear your big idea. And we need to facilitate that transformation. And we want to create an idea so clear that once the audience understands it, it is the only thing that they want to do, which is to adopt your idea and change. And that's what we want to get to. And so when we think about sharing our ideas, asking and the what and the why, and just consistently going through to make sure that your audience is completely top of mind. And now that we have kind of our why in hand, we want to know our goals. And we share our goals, we share that complete sentence, and we share what's at stake. And we have our audience identified. We now have the opportunity to go ahead and share our presentation with others and present the data. And so I want to give you a few tips and tricks when it comes to data visualization as well. And so I want to share, some of you may have heard of an individual by the name of Nate Silver. He is a renowned statistician and the founder of a popular website, 538. And it focuses in on data-driven analyses across politics, sports, science, and more. And he was made famous by his incredibly accurate predictions, particularly for his near-perfect prediction of the 2012 election. And he wrote a book, The Signal and the Noise, that emphasizes the importance of separating meaningful patterns or signals from the overwhelming amount of irrelevant information that we have today, which is the noise. And so when we look at data and try to tell a story about it, there will be so much information and data that you can choose from. And here's an example where there is, this is an example from the 2018 primaries. And we see that we're looking across different demographic and biographic traits for nominees of Senate. And as we're looking at it, we're trying to kind of understand and decipher what this is. And sometimes we sit here looking at charts and data and graph, and we look at this, looking back and forth, trying to get the main point of that graph. But what is this data telling us? What is the so what here? How are we trying to make sense of this? And so how do we go from this to this? With a simple visualization here, we're able to clearly see the traits that nominees had in the 2018 primaries for the Democratic Senate. It's primarily women, and primarily they were elected officials. And so we can see more clearly what the data was telling us. And so again, this is the exact same chart turned into a table. And so just clearly being able to utilize data visualization helps communicate your point that much easier. And so this was just simply created in Google or Google Sheets or Excel, or it doesn't not have to be anything complex or anything overly complicated. It's being able to just interpret the most important point and making sure that your audience doesn't have to work for your main message. You don't want them to have to interpret. We can't leave room for interpretation. We want to make it incredibly clear for them. And so when we think about data, it's not confusing at all. It's most often than not, it's the mode in which the communicator communicates that becomes confusing. And it's all in the messaging and the framing of the idea. But more importantly, it's the visualizations, where we don't have to write much, but we use charts and graphs to be able to tell the story. Nate Silver, I talked about just a few slides ago, said that when we create graphs, we have to cut through the noise and highlight what's most important, because we don't have to use everything when we are sharing and presenting. We can just simply use strong titles and headers and changing of colors to showcase our main points. And so that first one, like I said, we don't want to leave our visualizations or our stories up to interpretation. We have to tell our audience what we want them to think. So this one, I had a client who was an IT group, and they were analyzing the number of tickets that they have received over the course of the year. The presenter came to me and was so surprised that people, after looking at this graph, were not doing anything with this information. They were frustrated because they were just confused. Why was no one acting on this information? And honestly, when you look at it, I don't really know what I'm seeing. There's no story here to bring it to life, and the message is just kind of lost in this graph. And after kind of chatting with him and understanding a little bit more, I got the backstory. And if we stare at this graph long enough, you'll be able to see that there is a gap starting to form out on the right-hand side, where the number of tickets coming in are exceeding the number that are being processed. And after learning and chatting with this manager in this IT group, he shared that they lost a couple of resources, that they were understaffed, and they really wanted to hire a couple more people. And they could not understand why nobody was doing that based off of this graph. They presented it to their leadership and were showing them the data. They were showing them that they are understaffed, that all of the tickets that are coming in, we can't process them fast enough. And so they got frustrated and nothing happened. And it wasn't until that I worked with them to be able to showcase their visualizations in a way that was able to drive and spur action. So in this case, we changed from this messy bar graph with a bunch of numbers and a bunch of dates and transformed it into this. Again, we wanted to make that call to action very clear on top. The action up top, please approve the hire of 2 full-time employees. And we changed it and annotated the context directly on the graph, drawing attention to that gap that's forming on the right-hand side. And so we put in a timestamp to be able to share the context of, in May, 2 employees quit, and sharing that we nearly kept up with the incoming volume in the following 2 months, but fell behind with the increase in August and haven't been able to catch up since. And really, we wanted to draw attention to the gap that's forming on the right-hand side. That here, we're showing all of the data from the year, January to December, but what problem that we really wanted to focus on and what we really wanted to highlight for that leadership team here in this case was the difference. And after that employee left, those two employees left, and then what happened as a result of it. And understanding that starting in August, we started to see that we weren't able to keep up with the work. And so we see here that there are issues not with the data, but how we communicate the data. And in sharing this, I want you all to be able to feel empowered to showcase and to share your data in a way that keeps the audience in mind, but most importantly, that cuts through the noise. How can you create really clean and really clear visualizations that enable you to get your point across and enables your audience, your stakeholders, your partners, the people that you're reporting to, and the people who report to you to do the things that you want them to do? And data is a very, very strong factor in this, but it's how you tell the story, whether that's in an oral format and talking with them or through data visualizations. The how matters. And like I shared earlier, how I did this was simply in Excel or Google Sheets. I don't have a fancy visualization tool. I don't use Tableau, or I don't even use R or anything more advanced than what you need at the bare minimum. And so this was created in Google Sheets. And to add that, you just add on additional layers of text. So I just added a line at the month of May. And then I added a text box on top to further dive deeper into the story. Because also what we want to do is to be able to let our charts and our graphs stand alone. Because we won't always be there when our audience member or stakeholders are reading our contents and are going through our data. We have to be able to let our stories stand alone. And so here on this slide, you would have to explain it. You would have to go through and give voiceover to what's happening. But here, the story stands alone, where it is fine if I just left it here, you all would know what this meant almost immediately because I told the effective story. And so doing very simple things like adding text on top goes a really, really long way. And so with that, I know we went through a bunch of different topics and a bunch of different things, and I tried to keep it high level so we can get through a multitude of things. And so I want to say just thank you all for participating into today's storytelling with data sessions. I am available if anyone wants to reach out with additional questions around storytelling techniques, data visualization, or crafting a strong narrative. Feel free to reach out. I will be more than happy to help and offer up and provide just deeper insights here. But I think we do have some additional time for questions. And so feel free to come off mute or share those questions in the chat and get some of your further questions asked.
Thanks so much for that, Lena. As we kind of give a few moments here for those questions to come in, I have one for you from me. You know, here at DreamBank, we're a community that is built up of fellow fearless dreamers. What's one piece of advice you have for someone who's actively pursuing a dream right now?
Oh, so many good things can come from that. But I think the most important thing that you can do is remember your why, because it will get really hard. There will be moments where it gets tough and there is obstacle after obstacle and it will fail and you will not know what to do and you will cry, you will break down, you will want to quit a million times over. But knowing your why will hold you through those tough times and helping you to understand why I started this in the first place and letting your why be stronger than your worry, letting your why be stronger than your angst, and letting your why be stronger than the obstacle you're facing. That's the thing that's going to carry you through.
I love that. I think that what you just said right there, let your why be stronger than your worry. I think that that's something that I've been practicing a little bit more as I've gotten older and into my 30s as well, and have found a lot of value in as well. And I had a great piece of advice from my coworker who mentioned, you know, Andy, if you feel like you can come up with a strong why in 15 minutes, imagine what you could come up with in, you know, 30 minutes, 60 minutes,
Yeah.
120. So that's
Yeah.
also really
Yeah.
grounding. We had a great question from Diane come in. Excellent presentation, very well organized. Props to you, Lena. How did you get past the C? That's her question. How did you get past the C?
Oh, and I'm assuming you're referring back to my statistics class back in college. How I got past it is I got my C and I moved on. But I think that how I even got to this data analytics role in Google when I had no expertise, I was terrible at math, I was just scared of it, it was nerve-wracking, is that I leaned into knowing that this is a really important skill and I'm going to have to force myself to do it. There are going to be so many things that you don't want to do in your career and in your life, but there are certain things that you have to do in order to go to the next level. And I realized working at Google that data is at the core of everything that we do. And our world is moving towards that. Data will be at the core of everything we do. And in order to lean into that, we have to push past our vulnerabilities and our weaknesses and improve upon them. But what I realized is that even though I was bad at statistics and I'm not a huge technical data person, what I am incredibly great at and what I've been able to carve a niche out at Google is storytelling with data. And so even though I'm not the super technical, I can tell a really amazing story that drives anyone to act and to move. And so I'm not in the trenches of it, but I can speak both languages. And that makes me an awesome chameleon to be able to speak to the super technical folks and to the non-researcher audiences. And that is my competitive advantage.
I love that. I love that. We've got some questions that have come in regards to audiences. This first one is, what do you do if the audience is made up of very different people? They have different jobs, investors versus staff, different personalities, etc. The audience wants to take away different things. So the question is, what do you do if the audience is made up of very different people?
Yeah, great question. So if the audience is made up of different people, determine the best method to relay the message to. So if you're thinking about if you are in a town hall format with all of those wide variety of audiences sitting in one room and you have one moment in time to speak to them all, you incorporate different elements into your presentation or to your speech or to your share out to them. So I'm leaning in and speaking to those skeptics or the charismatics. You have to, again, be a chameleon and be able to subtly mix and mingle with those different people individually. And so understanding, I shared those five personality types. If you look up Harvard Business Review from 2002, they talked about five different types of people and five methods of communication. They share those five archetypes and they studied this for years and boiled it down to out of the 8 billion people in this world, there are five archetypes. And if you are able to incorporate those five archetypes and speak directly to them in your presentation, you'll be able to hit on different types of people and speak to them. But if you think about you have a newsletter, for example, you can begin to segment your audience into different archetypes to be able to speak to those differently. And so it's understanding the best method and mode of communication and when you can segment and when you can break them up, break them up. But if you can't, then you'll have to maneuver and translate multiple times and speak to different people and use different methods of communication in that singular presentation. Like I did here, speaking to the people who are really logical, showing videos for people who are like those visual learners and who like to see real life examples, going through and sharing my background to build credibility for those skeptics who are like, can she do this? What does she know about this? And so it's really using a wide variety of tools in a singular presentation to speak to all of those people.
I want to build on a last part that you had mentioned there too about building credibility for skeptics. We had a great question that came in regards to just that. How do you address concerns your audience has with the validity of the data that you are presenting?
Great question. Appendixes are really, really, really important. And so it's one thing to say something really, really confidently, but if someone asks a question, you should be ready to zoom in and dive deep into that topic area that they're inquiring about to show that credibility. So if I went through this awesome presentation and I wasn't able to answer any of the questions, everyone would be a little skeptical of all the information that I'm providing. but having a really robust appendix at the end of your presentation to be able to showcase where you got this data from, to be able to showcase what points there are, or even just expound deeper, because knowing your audience, you have to understand they don't need to know absolutely everything, but you should, as the presenter and as the communicator, know absolutely everything, but segment it to what's most relevant to that individual. And so if they need something else from a different audience member, for example, you're going to have to go into your toolkit or your appendix or the back of your brain to be able to answer that question. And that comes with just being really, really prepared and anticipating the questions that they will ask. And again, that comes with knowing your audience. You will anticipate the questions that they're already asking if you did your homework.
This next question comes in from Carol. Can you please share the questions that you had said earlier to focus on when it comes to who your audience is and what info to share?
Yes. Let me find those slides. Okay, so essentially, the questions are, why should they care? Why is it helpful to them? So again, why should your audience care and why is it helpful to them? Second one, what is the desired outcome if your idea is accepted? And then, what is your unique point of view? And finally, what's at stake if we don't change now? So understanding those, and then we have some questions and understanding your audience that I will pop into the chat right here so that you can have them. There are a bunch of questions to consider. And we will go through and understanding their values, their knowledge, their desire and motivation, and then their lifestyle. I just put those in the chat. So you'll be able to kind of go through those questions on your own. Feel free to copy that and put that into your notes and save those elsewhere. But when you go through those and you're really able to answer those questions, you're going to be most effective in communicating to that audience.
Just get some links ready over here. That looks like all the questions that have come in for right now. So I want to thank you, Lena, for putting together such a wonderful presentation. Lots to digest and plenty of takeaways. Thank you all for joining us here. Again, so grateful that you took time out of your day to join us. I know that Lena did a wonderful job covering a lot of ground, lots of things to take away, lots of things to digest. This event is being recorded. I know this question has come up a couple times and can be viewed on our YouTube page, that is not a pretty link. Hang on one second here. I've got something a little bit less jargony than that, but we do a great job of highlighting many of our virtual presentations and showcasing them. Here's a link to our website, which includes a lot of our upcoming events and offerings in the pipeline. We try and appeal to, again, as many different dreamers as we can, cast a very wide net in terms of our offerings. And then here is our YouTube page as well, which is a great resource for many of our previous presentations, and I'll go ahead and I'll get that uploaded to there as well. So again, I want to thank you, Lena. Thanks everyone for taking time to join us here. With that being said, we will go ahead and cap it there, and we will see you all next time. Take care, folks.